So if your SIBO keeps coming back no matter what you do, know that you're not crazy. Like, this is not in your head, and you're absolutely not alone. This is really common because there's one underlying reason that your SIBO symptoms disappear for weeks at a time and then come back with a vengeance. And once you understand this cycle, you can finally break it. So let me help you understand exactly what's happening here. Because with SIBO symptoms, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, the symptoms can be really significant for some people and really debilitating, like life-altering, ruin your life kind of situation. And when a person starts to feel better, it's like they won the lottery. I get to be a human again. But then when the symptoms come right back, it's like you won the lottery, but you don't get to keep the money. Oh, you're the winner. Great job, but we're gonna take the money back. So what we want to do is understand what's going on so that we can stop that. So if you're having significant ups and downs with your SIBO symptoms, or it just keeps coming back, be sure to watch this whole video so that you can understand that you're not doing treatment wrong. There's a cycle that most practitioners don't understand that's the real reason why your symptoms never stay gone. So in this video, I'm going to break down the underlying cause that allows SIBO to return even after successful treatment, why your gut environment is setting up the perfect conditions for a bacterial overgrowth. We're going to talk about the 3 factors that must be addressed simultaneously to break this cycle, and steps you can take differently starting today. So let's head to the smartboard and get you a plan that can help you create some real results. So I realized I needed to make this video because it was over on our video for the hidden cause of SIBO that user mgams said, any idea why a SIBO issue could just get worse without any reason? My symptoms were kind of the same for a long time and without any changes. Same exact food, same everything. New symptoms appeared and others just got worse. And this is really common to hear, and mgams asks a lot of really good questions, so I kind of wanted to tackle this a little bit. But to understand these ups and downs and symptoms and why symptoms can return after a successful treatment, we really need to understand biofilm cycles. So to dig into this, we'll jump into this study on the natural anti-biofilm agents, strategies to control biofilm forming pathogens. And I'll put the link to this study in the description below the video. And I just pulled up this picture from this study to help us kind of understand this a little bit. And basically, biofilms are like a protective structures that pathogens can form around themselves to protect themselves and kind of work together in harmony to have more success living. And so basically how this starts is some type of pathogen will attach to some type of surface, and then as they attach, they do what's called this quorum sensing, where they send out these signals like, hey, I'm here, anybody want to hang out, anybody want to work with me? And so then the other pathogens will come together and they start to form this biofilm around them to protect themselves. And then as they mature, now they become even more protected. So when you're putting in some type of antimicrobial agent into the body to wipe out this SIBO issue, you're taking care of all of these kind of free-floating pathogens. You're wiping them out, but it's not getting into these biofilms. These biofilms are set up where they can bring that antimicrobial agent in and be like, we don't like this, let's get it right out of here. And then they can push it right back out and they stay protected within this biofilm. So people will have a lot of improvement when they wipe out all of these guys, but if they're not taking care of the biofilms, there really is a problem still existing in the system. So where this comes into play is that we need to understand the cycles that as they come together and as they mature, but once they're matured, they also start to disperse free-flowing bacteria back out into the system, along with a bit of colony, like, it's a smaller colony, like, let's disperse all this so we can set up other colonies as well. So a lot of people will see a lot of improvement, but then a biofilm will kind of like disperse, and now we have a whole new layer of all these bad guys showing up. Also, ups and downs can come because if you're doing things that are kind of degrading these biofilms, you're basically whacking a beehive with a stick. So there's all these bad guys in there, and you kind of bust their house up a little bit, and then they all start running, hey, what's going on out here? And all the symptoms can come back really magnified. So when we understand this cycle, now we understand when symptoms come back. We don't feel like, we're just broken, or I'd have a better chance of building a time machine, just going back before I had this, than trying to fix this problem. When we understand the cycle, then we can take steps to not only wipe out the bad guys, but to take care of these biofilms as well. Now, this is really the most common reason that symptoms go up and down and that people have things come back when they thought it was gone. This is the most common issue. I view it as the most important issue, but there are other things that come up. So let's not have such a narrow viewpoint that we think it's just one thing and we just have to fix that one thing. There are usually other possibilities, which is usually why the medical world has such a hard time correcting issues. They're just looking for one thing. We need to understand that the underlying cause can be different from person to person. So another thing to take into account, when M-Gams is talking about like, hey, I didn't do anything different, I'm not doing anything, what's going on? Other things can go on in the body, like a level of resources that are available to the body to deal with some type of invader. The body might have some other urgent situation that it's viewing as a priority. This might be your priority, is to take care of your SIBO issue. But if you have some kind of menstrual cycle come up, some other kind of cycle in the body that requires a lot more resources, now the body's got to put resources toward this, and maybe fewer resources are going towards this issue. So you might have a flare-up of symptoms that occur during a need for resources in another area of the body. So we want to understand that we don't get to prioritize the body. The body really is smarter than we are, and it might have other things going on, and maybe you have an increase in stress in your life or in your body, so you're eating all the same food, you're using the same supplements, but maybe you realize your boss is a jerk and you just want to get out of there. So that type of stress also can make resources go to other areas in the body to deal with what it's viewing as an emergency when your boss is really just a jerk. So just don't view it like I ate this and this is supposed to happen. Like the body is just not that simplistic. There's a lot more that can be going on that we don't understand that could dictate where symptoms are going to be. So try not to be so frustrated with yourself when symptoms come up when you feel like you're doing everything right. The body's a complicated situation. Allow this to just work itself out a little bit. Now let's look at some other factors that can be important when it comes to having these SIBO symptoms come back when we've corrected the issue already. So one thing that's really important is that we need to close the front door. If you have a bunch of your teenagers having this huge party in your house and they're destroying the house and they're riding your lawnmower down the stairs, the first thing that you need to do to correct this destruction that's going on is to get the kids out of the house. But what if you're running everybody out of the house and at the same time there's more kids coming in, wanting different lawnmowers, and why are they riding the lawnmowers in the house? But what we need to understand with SIBO is that most people have SIBO because of a low stomach acid issue. And it's very common for people to have low stomach acid for a wide variety of reasons. I've talked in a lot of other videos about studies that I've shared that showed that when stomach acid goes low, and whether a person is using a PPI, a proton pump inhibitor, like an acid reflux medication that turns off stomach acid, or a person just has low stomach acid for other reasons, that kind of allows bacteria to come in and set up camp here in the small intestine. Because this stomach acid here in the stomach is not just there so that we can acidify our food and break it down and get all the nutrients out of that food. It's kind of a big deal. It's also there as the barrier to the whole digestive tract. So when varmints come in on the food that we're eating, they're supposed to die in an acid bath. So when there's not enough stomach acid, they come in and they set up camp and they're like, oh, this is nice. Let's exist here. And then they move down to the small intestine, and we really shouldn't have a lot of bacteria here. So that's where we get this small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So a lot of people take steps to wipe all this out. Hey, I really treated my SIBO. I feel so much better, but they don't close the front door. They don't fix that acid function, and then it comes right back 2-3 months later. So that can be a really big deal, and we also need to understand that there's a back door to this small intestine. Down here is what's called the ileocecal valve, and it's basically a sphincter that opens up so that food can move from the small intestine into the large intestine, and then it's supposed to close so that all this fecal matter and all this bacteria that's supposed to exist in our large intestine, we should have beneficial bacteria here. They're very helpful for us. But it shouldn't back up into the small intestine, so this valve is supposed to close. But a lot of people don't have this working correctly. We'll put a link in the description below for our video on ileocecal valve dysfunction if you want to dig deeper into this. But I just want you to understand gastrin right here so we can understand this ileocecal valve a little bit more. And gastrin is a hormone that is produced here in the stomach. When food comes in, it says, hey, it's time to make some gastrin. So the body makes gastrin, and that gastrin tells the stomach to make hydrochloric acid. It tells it, hey, food is in here. It needs to be acidified so we can break it down, so make hydrochloric acid. That's gastrin's job. But gastrin also goes through the circulatory system so that it can signal other areas of the digestive tract. And its other job is to tell this small intestine, hey, let's move some of this food out. Let's open up this valve here and push this into the large intestine to make room here for this food that just came in. So it makes sense that gastrin would do that. But we'll look at this study here, predictors of gastrin elevation following proton pump inhibitor therapy. And this study showed us that the longer that somebody was on a proton pump inhibitor that was turning off stomach acid, that the higher that their gastrin level would go. And why wouldn't it? The body raises this gastrin to say, hey, make stomach acid so that we can acidify this food and break it down. But when it doesn't get acidified, the body's like, oh, that didn't work. Oh, well, I'll just make more gastrin. That's what I do to tell this stomach to make hydrochloric acid. But something is restricting the acid production. So the gastrin just keeps going higher and higher. And if the gastrin is going high, it's still going to do its other jobs. And remember, the other job is to open up this ileocecal valve. So if gastrin is high because stomach acid is low, it's going to keep this ileocecal valve open and allow all this bacteria to go back into the small intestine where it really shouldn't be. So we have this party. It's already a rager. It's causing a lot of trouble. We don't have the front door open because we're not acidifying our food correctly, and that's making the back door open. So bad guys are coming in from both directions. How are we ever supposed to keep this problem away? Why wouldn't it come back? So by acidifying the stomach correctly, we not only close the front door, we also close the back door. Now we can take these steps that we're going to talk about in a second to wipe these bad guys out and their biofilms. Another important thing is proper bile flow. Bile is supposed to flow down from the gallbladder once this acidic product leaves the stomach, and it helps neutralize, it helps us break down our dietary fats, it helps to trigger the bicarb out of the pancreas that helps us neutralize acids as well. So a lot of people have this bile going too thick and sticky that it won't flow correctly, and a lot of people feel like bile has some antimicrobial properties that helps wipe out some of this bacteria that may have gotten through that acid production there in the stomach. So I'm not going to dig too far into this, but I'll have links in the description below for our video on 10 signs of poor bile flow so you can see if that might be a problem for you as well. And as we're going through these steps of fixing digestion and talking about acidifying the stomach, if these things that I'm describing are a little too overwhelming for you, then I'll have a link in the description below for our totally free digestion course. And this free course just walks you through a lot of these steps, figuring out which aspects of digestion you need to improve. And it just has short videos that kind of hold your hand and walk you through it so it's not so overwhelming. And that course is totally free, so you'll have that link below if this overwhelms you in any way. Now, one thing that we need to think about when we're trying to wipe out all these bad guys is we need to understand responses. Because a lot of people will take some type of antimicrobial, or they'll try to acidify the stomach, and their symptoms will magnify. And they're like, I feel worse. I ain't doing that again. But we need to understand that a lot of our symptoms from SIBO don't come from the actual bacteria or whatever type of varmint it is. We can associate this with SIFO and fungal issues or mold or yeast or candida. All these pathogens have the ability to create these biofilms like this. And the symptoms come from the toxins that they put out. They excrete waste and they excrete other chemicals and such that create these symptoms. So when we kill them off, we basically bust them apart, and all of that stuff that was in them comes out at once. So our symptoms can actually be magnified from a die-off reaction while we're killing these off. So some people might take some of these things that we'll talk about and they'll feel worse, and they're like, oh, I have a reaction when I take that, so I can't take that, I need to use something different. But the reality is that sometimes that reaction can be good. It's a sign that you're really taking care of the situation. Now, that doesn't mean you always want to take everything that makes you feel worse. You need to kind of understand what you're looking at, but we need to understand a die-off reaction so that when we change our diet or when we're taking some type of antimicrobial or biofilm agent, if we feel worse, it might make sense. Maybe we're killing off things and there's that die-off reaction. Maybe we're disintegrating some biofilms and we're whacking the beehive with a stick and all these guys are coming running out and magnifying our symptoms. So you want to give yourself a little bit of time and see, do I start to feel better after a week or two of doing this? And if you do, then you understand what that reaction was that you were having. Now, before we talk about setting up this environment so that it's not optimal for an overgrowth, let's look at some of these steps to take care of this. People are always like, just tell me what I should take, whippersnapper, and it's just not always that simple, but let's get to some steps. Let's talk about those 3 factors that have to be addressed simultaneously to keep SIBO from coming back. And as we go into steps, just remember that I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving anybody medical advice, and I don't know MGAMs, I don't know their unique situation and their bio-individuality, so I couldn't possibly tell them what they need to do. I'm just a professional stand-up comic turned nutrition author, because when 23 different doctors couldn't help me get my voice back when I lost my voice for 8 years, I had to dig for my own answers. And now I teach what I learned to health professionals so that they can help their clients fix the actual underlying causes of problems instead of just covering up the symptoms. So this is just educational material for you to help you understand better questions to ask your doctor, and you can dig into a lot of these studies that I put below. Because what's interesting is I found all the information that I needed to fix my digestive issues and my voice in the medical literature, but yet none of those 23 doctors understood any of that stuff. So sometimes it's about digging for your own answers to help you ask the right questions to your doctor. So first of all, we're going to have to use some type of antimicrobial agent. If you like to use natural things like I do, things like garlic and berberine and mastic gum, celery juice, curcumin. We talk about a lot of these in other videos and in that free digestion course as well. But you're most likely going to have to use more than one thing to really wipe out a significant overgrowth. But the second factor that's so important is that we also want to address those biofilms. So I'm going to have a link in the description below to a study that shows how essential oils like oregano oil and clove oil are very effective at disintegrating those biofilms so that you can access all the people living in that community and wipe them out as well. They're not people, they're bad guys, but whatever. We also want to look at something called biocidin. This is a formula that contains a lot of these different things that can be effective at breaking down these biofilms. We're not the manufacturer of biocidin. This is not a paid promotion. This is just what we use with our clients. So I'll put a link to that in the description below just so that you can look at the ingredients and see, oh, maybe I have some of this stuff in my house already. But that can be helpful. I'm not going to give you any dosages on this. You're going to have to do your research to figure out what's going to be appropriate for you. But those can be helpful. Some people also feel like stevia can actually be helpful in breaking down those biofilms. And some people are like, oh, I have a reaction when I have that, but that could be part of it, is that you're helping to wipe out these biofilms. Enzymes can also be helpful in breaking those down. And studies show that combinations of enzymes, including like proteases like serrapeptase and polysaccharides like amylase and lipases, seem to be the most effective. But the third factor that's really important is this betaine HCl that we can use to acidify our stomach. So we'll look at this study here on mealtime supplementation with betaine HCl for functional hypochlorhydria. Hypochlorhydria is just low stomach acid. So in this study, they turned off everybody's stomach acid using a PPI medication, and then they saw all the symptoms that show up from low stomach acid, and then they supplemented with what's called betaine HCl capsules with their meal, and then that helps that stomach acidify like it's supposed to, and then all those symptoms improve. So you can look through that study if you want. We talk about that in a lot of other videos as well. But when you can acidify the stomach correctly, now not only can you break down your food and get the nutrients out of that food and give the body more resources it needs to fight off an invader, but you're closing the front door. And when you can acidify the stomach enough, then the body doesn't have to continue to make this gastrin, making the gastrin go super high. So now you get to close the back door too. So properly using HCl can be a very big deal, but you also want to understand possible troubles like we talked about. The people who need to supplement with HCl the most are usually the people that have the most trouble when they start using it, because most people that have an overgrowth here will often have an overgrowth in their stomach too. So biofilms can exist in the stomach as well. You could be taking steps to wipe them out, but they could still be existing in the stomach. So a person could take some HCl and acidify the stomach, but this bacteria put out a lot of alkaline waste in a lot of circumstances. So if they're alkalizing the stomach more and you're putting acid in there, well, their alkaline waste byproduct could be neutralizing the acid that you're putting in there. So not only can that magnify symptoms for a person, but maybe it makes that HCl not as effective. So we like to see people to take these steps to kind of bring this overgrowth down a few notches as they start to acidify the stomach. So not only they don't have as many symptoms, but then that HCl can be more effective. But you really want to know how to use HCl the right way. That totally free course will walk you through figuring out what dose is right for you and steps you may need to take before starting that so that you don't get magnified symptoms. But this is a really big deal, and that kind of brings us to motility. A lot of people will say, well, people have SIBO because they have slow motility, and these things are not moving through and carrying the bacteria out like they're supposed to. Things are moving too slowly. But this study here on a prospective evaluation of ileocecal valve dysfunction and intestinal motility derangement in small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But this study showed us that the majority of people with SIBO have a more alkaline environment in the small intestine. And that can be because the bacteria are putting out these byproducts that are more alkaline, alkalizing this environment. But also, if this doesn't get acidified in the stomach like it's supposed to, then the food moving through here doesn't start off as acidic. So all these other things that are happening are alkalizing it even more, and then this whole environment becomes even more alkaline. So that's a more hospitable environment for bad guys to come in and really thrive. We don't want this to be on the alkaline side. Not only does that allow them to thrive, but then things move slower and we can create chronic constipation issues that have the ability to block this valve from closing correctly and causing even more havoc. So this stomach acid is a really big deal, not only to close the front door and close the back door, but also make this environment not so hospitable so that the SIBO just comes back and like, this is the party place. We heard this place was great. Let's get at it. We want to make this to where it's not optimal for them to thrive. And a lot of people are going to tell you, oh man, your vagus nerve is broken. That's why you don't have any motility. But it's usually about this lack of acid that's signaling all these other things that have to happen to move things along correctly and allow the vagus nerve to work the right way. That's also why the diet stuff can be so important. Something you can do today, right away. If you're having a high carbohydrate diet or consuming sugars and processed junk, you're really feeding all these bad guys. You're really setting them up and saying, yeah, let's get at it. Let's do some good stuff here. You want to reduce those types of high carb foods that you're consuming, and that's why people like MGAMs were saying, hey, I'm eating the right way, I'm reducing all these carbs and sugars, but I'm not fixing everything. It's just a piece of the puzzle. But if you're eating really high carbs and sugars, you want to knock that out today. That doesn't mean you need to go on a ketogenic or carnivore diet and remove all your carbohydrates and sugars. For some people that can magnify some issues, but you really want to do a lower carbohydrate diet while you're working to get this under control. And the final step to think about is probiotics. We really want to repopulate this with good gut flora, and some of the studies show that probiotics have the ability to kind of maintain these biofilms. And a lot of these things like the oregano oil and the clove oil and even some of the antimicrobials like garlic and such have the ability to restrict that quorum sensing that we were talking about, that the pathogens put out to say, hey, I'm here, anybody else want to come help me make a biofilm? It has the ability to block some of this. So anything that you can do to disrupt the ability for them to create those biofilms can really be beneficial. Most people don't want to start off with probiotics. If you put in good bacteria with all these bad guys in there, they start to battle each other, and it has the ability to really magnify some symptoms significantly. So I like to see clients get things in a little bit of a better scenario where they're starting to feel a little bit better, they're acidifying the stomach correctly, they're not feeling so bloated, and then they could start doing some probiotics as they're winding up. But you really want to crank up the probiotics once you're done putting in all these antimicrobials. You're not wiping out things as you're putting them in. But this is an important step that you don't want to leave out. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, just remember the most important aspects are that you're going to use something to wipe out the bad guys. And there's so many different varieties of antimicrobials you can use. It can sometimes be helpful to kind of cycle and mix them up a little bit, which can also be why when some people use antibiotics and they kind of wipe out all the bad bacteria, then they don't do anything to take care of any type of yeast, mold, fungal guys. And for a lot of situations, the yeast and the bacteria are kind of keeping each other in check. So when you wipe out all the bacteria, there's nobody to police all of these yeast, mold, fungal guys, and then they kind of take over and create a problem in a different version. So it can be helpful to kind of move between different type of antimicrobial things, maybe some grapefruit seed extract that's more appropriate for yeast, mold, fungal issues, and cycle through those when you're not seeing the results that you want to try to mix up the approach that you're taking. You need to use something like oregano oil or something to address the biofilms. You want to make sure the stomach is acidified correctly, so you're closing the front door and the back door. You want to make sure you're not piling a bunch of carbs and sugars in there to feed them and help them thrive. And then you really want to make sure that you're putting probiotics in towards the end of all of this to help set up this environment so that they can police the situation. So when the bad guys do come in, then the probiotics are there to say, hey, this is a good town. This is not that kind of neighborhood, and they can kind of keep everything in check. But you can also see the steps are not going to be the same for everybody. If somebody has a bile flow issue, they really need to address that. So you really want to look at where you are, and that free digestion course will help you walk through that process a whole lot easier. So right now, if you also want to have the ability to kind of monitor your progress and how things are going, you can jump over and check out our video on how to check on SIBO at home. I can't wait to hear about your results.